Hey guys, tonight we step into the crooked cobblestones of ancient Rome, and the very first thing that hits you isn't the sight of marble temples or the thunder of sandals. It's the smell. You thought you could handle it, but the air clings to your nose with a mix of sweat, smoke, and something you're not sure you want to identify. You probably won't survive this if your stomach isn't at least half made of iron. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time. I'm always curious who's awake with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander through the narrow alleys, hemmed in by tall insules. Those Roman apartment blocks stacked so high they look ready to collapse with one good sneeze. Laundry hangs overhead, dripping who knows what down onto your shoulders, and someone's chamber pot has been emptied a little too casually from the second floor. That splash near your sandals. You decide not to look down. The Romans weren't shy about waste disposal. Their streets doubled as open sewers, and the concept of curb appeal definitely wasn't invented yet. The city hums around you, a chorus of vendors shouting, donkeys braying, and smithies hammering. But underlying it all is the pungent perfume of humanity, thousands upon thousands packed into one urban sprawl, eating, sweating, and producing all the byproducts of daily life with nowhere polite to put them. Historians still argue whether the average Roman city smelled worse than, say, medieval London, but your nose is voting firmly in favor of yes. A woman passes you carrying a jar balanced on her hip, and you think at first it's water. Then, the ammonia sting tells you otherwise. It's urine, collected for the fuller's workshop. You try to sidestep, but the crowd presses you forward until you're shoulder to shoulder with strangers. Everyone sweats in the Mediterranean sun, and with baths not always an option, the aroma is rich and layered. Forget your favorite modern cologne. Here, the trending scent is Eau de Humanity, with notes of donkey dung and roasted fish. You pause to catch your breath at a crossroads shrine, one of the little altars Romans built to keep the gods of the crossroads happy. Offerings litter the ground, a piece of bread, half-rotted fruit, a smear of wine that has drawn ants in legions. A cat slinks by, tail twitching, and swipes the offering with no concern for divine retribution. You almost laugh, because if the gods cared about cleanliness, Rome would have been smote ages ago. What strikes you next isn't just the dirt underfoot, but how normal it is for Romans. To them, this is the pulse of life, the raw mix of sacred and profane, of fresh bread mingling with horse manure. In fact, some Romans actually associated strong smells with health, believing that stinky air could ward off disease. Fringe medical writers even advised inhaling certain stenches to balance the body's humors. You take one cautious sniff of the alleyway and decide that's one fringe theory you won't be testing. As you edge closer to the forum, the noise swells, and so does the scent profile. Bakers are pulling bread from wood-fired ovens, the yeasty warmth wrapping around you, almost masking the fishmonger's stall across the street. Almost. The fishmonger is hacking apart tuna, scales flying, while barrels of pickled anchovies leak brine into the gutters. Dogs lurk hopefully nearby, licking whatever drips their way. If you've ever complained about your neighbor reheating fish in the office microwave, multiply that by 1,000 and add donkey carts for good measure. Somewhere, behind you, a slave is sweeping debris into the gutter with a palm broom. It doesn't help much. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's legendary sewer system, does exist, but not every street connects neatly into it. So most waste simply piles up until it rains, or until unlucky workers shovel it toward the drains. Scholars debate whether the cloaca was as effective as Roman writers bragged. Was it truly an engineering marvel, or just a glorified ditch? Either way, the evidence is under your sandals. You catch yourself gagging at a sudden whiff. Someone nearby is roasting goat offal, maybe, liver or tripe. For Romans, no part of the animal went to waste. For you, it's a sensory gauntlet. And yet, there's something fascinating about it, like you're peeling back the glossy postcard version of Rome and seeing what real daily life smelled like. As you press on, you notice graffiti scratched into the plaster walls, political slogans, insults, even doodles of gladiators. One scroll reads like an ancient Yelp review. The fish sauce here is rotten. You can't help but chuckle. 2,000 years later, people are still leaving bad reviews about bad smells. Some things never change. Your sandals squish in a puddle, and you don't dare guess what's in it. Overhead, the sun bakes the roofs, intensifying every odor into a thick stew. A donkey brays, a child cries, a vendor hawks honeycakes with a voice hoarse from overuse. The city is alive, overwhelming, disgusting, and oddly comforting, because it means you're experiencing Rome as Romans truly did, not as pristine marble, but as messy humanity. As dusk begins to fall, torches flare to life. The smoke adds a new layer of haze, acrid pine resin mixing with everything else. You realize with a tired smile that you've already adjusted. The stink no longer shocks. You've blended into it, part of the swirling tide. Maybe that's the secret. When everyone smells equally questionable, no one notices. You follow the crowd to a quieter corner, drawn by the sound of water trickling somewhere behind a stone wall. At first, you expect a fountain or maybe one of those ornate public wells. Instead, the alley opens up into a small square, and you find yourself facing a row of arched doorways. Each one leads into the same strange space, a public toilet. The Romans called it a latrina, and they treated it as casually as you treat a coffee shop. Inside, you hesitate. The room is wide, airy, lined with long marble benches, but those benches have holes cut right into them, side by side, without dividers, without privacy, without shame. Picture 20 strangers sitting shoulder to shoulder, togas draped just so, chatting about politics, business deals, or the latest gladiator upset, all while doing their business. You shuffle in, trying to act normal, but your brain can't quite process this group activity. Underneath the benches runs a steady stream of water, carrying waste away toward the city's drains. It's ingenious, really, though you're not about to call it sanitary. And this is where you meet one of the strangest household tools of all Roman life, the sponge on a stick, the tersorium. Imagine a loofah glued to a wooden handle, shared by everyone in the room. After each use, people rinse it in a trough of salty water or vinegar sitting at their feet. A thoughtful idea, but not exactly comforting when you realize it means the person before you probably didn't rinse as thoroughly as they should have. Historians still argue whether Romans truly shared the same sponge or carried their own personal version like some travel toothbrush. Either way, you eye the vinegar bucket and know in your heart that no amount of acidic soak could erase what it just endured. Modern travel tip: this is not the souvenir you bring home. As you sit there, trying to blend in, you notice how surprisingly social the atmosphere is. People lean over to gossip about the latest Senate scandal. One man gestures wildly, nearly tipping his sponge stick over his neighbor's toga. Another hums tunelessly, clearly unbothered by the environment. For Romans, the toilet doubled as a newsstand and networking hub. If you wanted to know what was happening in the forum, you could skip the speeches and come here instead. Of course, not everyone was so cheerful. Poets like Martial made jokes about the filth, and satirists complained about the smells drifting up from these communal spaces. The funny part is, Romans considered this system advanced. Compared to the countryside, where waste might be dumped in pits, this was urban convenience. It was Rome's version of indoor plumbing, just with a little more intimacy than you probably bargained for. You catch the faint scrape of a rat somewhere in the shadows. It makes sense. The flow of water under the benches connects to the larger sewers, and vermin scurry freely. Some Romans even considered them omens. Fringe beliefs suggested that seeing a rat dart from a latrine could predict misfortune, a sort of gross fortune-telling. You silently hope that superstition doesn't apply tonight. One man beside you cracks a joke about the emperor's latest decree, and the whole row erupts in laughter. The acoustics of stone walls carry it upward, echoing strangely above your head. You can't help but smile. It's absurd, but there's a kind of camaraderie here, forged in the least glamorous of circumstances. Still, you make a mental note, never to shake anyone's hand after leaving. When you finally stand, you notice your sandals are damp again. The trickle of water beneath the benches sometimes splashes back, carrying its mix of vinegar, sponges, and everything else. You step carefully toward the doorway, grateful for the evening air, though it doesn't smell much cleaner. At least, outside, there are roasting chestnuts and bread to mask the undercurrent. Yet, the memory of the tersorium clings to you. That shared sponge, passed from hand to hand, says so much about Roman practicality. It wasn't that they didn't care about hygiene, it was that their idea of hygiene was shaped by what felt good enough. In their world, vinegar water was a disinfectant, marble benches were luxury, and privacy was optional, what mattered most. Yet, the memory of the tersorium clings to you. That shared sponge, passed from hand to hand, says so much about Roman practicality. It wasn't that they didn't care about hygiene, it was that their idea of hygiene was shaped by what felt good enough. In their world, vinegar water was a disinfectant, marble benches were luxury, and privacy was optional. What mattered most was efficiency and community. You walk back toward the main street, reflecting on how different your bathroom rituals are today. Imagine explaining toilet paper to a Roman. They'd probably laugh at the wastefulness, and you'd be stuck trying to justify why your version feels cleaner. Maybe that's the real irony. 2,000 years from now, someone might laugh at our bathroom habits too. As the night deepens, you can't shake one final thought. The next time someone tells you, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, you might want to ask for specifics, because if they mean this, you'd politely decline. You've barely shaken off the memory of that sponge on a stick when another sight demands your attention. A row of clay jars sits along the edge of a side street, each one tucked neatly into a recess in the wall. At first glance, you assume they're for water or grain. Then you notice a man stroll up, lift his tunic, and, well, contribute to the jar directly. The casualness of it almost makes you forget what's happening. Almost. These jars aren't random storage vessels. They're part of Rome's recycling program, if you can believe it. The Romans prized urine as a household product. Yes, that liquid gold wasn't just waste, it was raw material. The fullers' workshops, those laundry services scattered around the city, bought it up in bulk to bleach togas and clean clothes. And wealthier households used it too, for something even stranger: dental care. You duck into the nearest fuller's workshop to see for yourself. The floor is slick with dampness, and workers stomp barefoot in vats, agitating clothes through the pungent mixture of water, soapwort, and, yes, fermented urine. The ammonia cuts through grime, brightening fabrics. In a way, ordinary water couldn't. The workers joke loudly, stomping away like dancers at a grotesque festival. You try not to breathe too deeply, but it's hard when the air stings your nostrils with every inhale. Historians still argue whether the fullers added extra chemicals or relied entirely on nature's contribution, but either way, the results were impressively white togas and thoroughly unforgettable smells. But laundry wasn't the end of it. Romans also believed urine could whiten teeth. You shudder at the thought, but ancient texts mention rinsing with it as if it were a daily mouthwash. The logic was the same. Ammonia bleaches fabric, so why not enamel? You spot a wealthy matron stepping out of the shop, her toga dazzlingly bright, her smile radiant enough to blind you. If only you didn't know the secret behind the shine. Some scholars debate whether this practice was widespread or more of a fringe habit. Like those modern internet fads, you really shouldn't try at home. But even if only a few Romans swore by it, the idea alone makes your jaw clench. You glance at a nearby fountain, suddenly desperate to rinse your mouth with anything fresh. On the street, a tax collector ambles past. You overhear him explaining that Emperor Vespasian once imposed a tax on urine collection. That's right. Rome's leadership literally monetized bathroom breaks. People laughed at first, but the revenue added up, and soon the urine trade became as routine as grain or olive oil. The emperor even joked, "Money doesn't stink." You can't help but smirk. Technically true, but in this case, the source definitely did. As you walk further, you notice small boys darting between alleys, carrying jugs. Their task? To gather household chamber pots and sell the contents. Imagine growing up in a city where your first job is urine courier. You suddenly feel very grateful for whatever modern chores you once hated. Taking out the trash doesn't seem so bad anymore. The odd part is how normalized it all feels to Romans. Passers-by don't flinch when someone relieves themselves in a jar. They don't wrinkle their noses at the fuller's stink. For them, it's practical, thrifty, even ingenious. Waste becomes utility. You think of your own world, where recycling programs sort plastics and cans. In a strange way, this is Rome's version of eco-consciousness, just with a smell that no modern neighborhood committee would tolerate. You pause at a tavern doorway, where the innkeeper rinses mugs with a splash from a nearby jar. You decide against going inside. Some fringe historians speculate that urine might have been used in certain food preparation contexts as a cleaning agent, though others dismiss it as exaggeration. Either way, you're not volunteering to test the theory. The city hums as twilight deepens, and the glow of oil lamps spreads along the streets. A gentle breeze carries scents of roasted barley and figs, almost washing away the ammonia. Almost. Yet you realize the longer you stay, the less it bothers you. That's the unsettling part. Romans lived immersed in these smells, shaping their idea of normal. And slowly, it's shaping yours too. You glance back at the jars lined neatly against the wall, filled by strangers, all day long. Somewhere, another workshop waits to bleach another toga, to churn another batch of laundry, maybe even to produce a smile bright enough to make poets swoon. And you realize, with a rueful grin, that Rome runs not just on bread and circuses, but also on what most people would rather flush away. You drift away from the fuller's workshop, your nose still twitching at the ghost of ammonia, when another rumor reaches your ears. People talk about cures, about remedies brewed from things you'd rather not imagine. And at the center of this strange marketplace of medicine stand the gladiators. You thought their role ended in the arena, but in Rome, even death had commercial value. The crowd funnels you toward the Colosseum. The massive amphitheater looms, arches glowing in the fading sun, and the roar inside spills out like thunder. You press closer, slipping through an entrance, and suddenly the air is thick with sweat, dust, and the metallic tang of blood. The show is near its climax. Two fighters circle, weapons glinting, and when the final blow lands, the crowd erupts in a frenzy that shakes the stone. You shiver, not just from the violence, but from what comes next. Vendors rush forward before the body is even dragged away. They scoop up the blood into little cups, hawking it like hot chestnuts. "Good for epilepsy, good for strength," they cry, their voices hoarse but eager. People line up, tossing coins, sipping the still warm liquid as though it were a magic elixir. You recoil, but then notice the solemn faces. This isn't grotesque to them. It's medicine. Ancient physicians wrote that consuming gladiator blood, or even scraping up the liver and drying it into powder, could cure certain ailments, especially seizures. Historians still argue whether this was widespread belief or an exaggeration recorded by moralizing authors. But fringe accounts hint at apothecaries bottling dried blood, grinding it into pills, or mixing it with wine to disguise the taste. You can only imagine the placebo effect was strong because no actual cure was hiding in that chalice. A boy rushes past you, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, you catch a glimpse of pale fat, carved from a fallen fighter. Some Romans believed gladiator fat could treat joint pain or be smeared on wounds to heal them faster. To you, it's the stuff of nightmares. To them, it's no stranger than a jar of ointment. You wonder, fleetingly, if future generations will gawk at some of today's health fads with the same queasy disbelief. The practice wasn't limited to Rome either. Across the empire, local arenas became informal pharmacies after the games. In provincial towns, spectators were known to leap down from their seats to snatch blood-soaked sand before guards swept it away. Imagine filling your medicine cabinet with what you scraped from the floor of a stadium. That's commitment. One scholar describes how the Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself may have witnessed these rituals, though whether he approved or merely tolerated them is up for debate. Stoic philosophy, after all, wasn't particularly big on chugging blood cocktails. Still, the empire tolerated this curious overlap of entertainment and healing, as though the spectacle itself infused the body with some transferable vitality. You step back out of the Colosseum, your ears still ringing from the chants of habet, habet, and your stomach queasy at the sight of medicine being ladled straight from a corpse. Vendors linger outside, selling little clay bottles sealed with wax. The labels boast miraculous properties, though you suspect most are filled with nothing more than pig's blood or watered wine. And yet the belief is strong enough to keep business thriving. A man in a hooded cloak sidles up beside you, whispering that he can procure bones too. Crushed bone dust, he insists, helps with fertility. You wave him away, half unsettled, half amused. Somewhere in your mind, you compare it to the snake oils of later centuries, or those dubious internet cures peddled in modern times. Different ingredients, same hope, and there's another layer to it, almost poetic in its irony. Gladiators, often slaves or criminals, lived violent, brutal lives. In death, they were transformed into healers, their bodies treated with reverence not for who they were, but for what they could provide. You wonder if the men themselves ever suspected they'd be consumed in pieces, reduced to folk remedies that outlived them. The streets outside buzz with speculation. Some swear by the blood's power, others laugh it off as superstition. But one thing is certain. In Rome, disgust and devotion walk hand in hand. What you consider appalling was, to them, a thread in the fabric of life, a desperate attempt to wrestle health from the chaos of existence. As you turn away, the night air cools your skin, though the echoes of the crowd still reverberate inside you. You can't help but think of modern pharmacies, neat aisles of pills and syrups. How clean, how orderly they seem compared to the clamoring, blood-stained market you just witnessed. Yet the impulse is the same, to find healing, to seek hope, no matter how strange the source. You step carefully through the dimly lit streets, ears still ringing with the roar of the arena, when another kind of spectacle catches your eye. A noblewoman sweeps past in a litter, carried high by 4 sweating slaves. Her skin gleams pale in the torchlight, almost ghostly. At first you assume she's simply blessed with genetics, but a closer look reveals the truth. She's painted herself with the most fashionable and deadly cosmetic of the Roman world. Lead. Yes, actual lead. Ground fine and mixed into a paste, spread across cheeks and forehead to give that coveted marble-like pallor. To the Roman elite, pale skin wasn't just a beauty choice, it was a status symbol. It whispered, "I don't labor under the sun. I'm above that." And so they slathered it on, ignoring the way it cracked, the way it seeped invisibly into the body, poisoning slowly with every layer. You notice her lips, too, painted not red, but with another concoction that probably included cinnabar, a mercury compound. Your brain screams at the health risks, but here in Rome, the shimmer matters more than the science. Historians still argue whether Roman women fully understood the dangers or whether vanity simply outweighed caution. Judging by the confident sway of her litter, she certainly doesn't look worried. You duck into a small cosmetic shop just off the forum. The shelves are lined with jars of creams, powders, and pigments. The shopkeeper proudly demonstrates a pot of cerussa, a thick white paste of lead carbonate. He smears a dab across the back of his hand, and it gleams under the lamplight, bright as marble. He insists it makes skin radiant, flawless. You resist the urge to point out that it also makes people sick, causing hair loss, muscle weakness, and worse. But here, the shimmer sells. One customer giggles as she tries a rouge made from red ochre. Another whispers about a secret recipe involving chalk, vinegar, and even donkey's milk. You smile politely, though your insides twist. Fringe recipes included crocodile dung or bat blood as additives, promising youthfulness. And while you'd chalk those up to gossip, you've already seen enough to know Romans experimented with just about anything. Walking back outside, you pass a group of young men admiring themselves in a polished bronze mirror. Don't be fooled into thinking cosmetics were just for women. Roman men, especially those chasing power or popularity, dabbed powders and oils liberally. One wag even jokes about a senator who spends more time with his eyeliner than with his scrolls. You chuckle, but also wonder whether future historians will laugh at modern grooming trends with the same dry humor. of course, not everyone admired these painted faces. Writers like Juvenal mocked the artifice, calling women who wore too much makeup deceitful or vain. The irony is sharp, considering how many of those same critics probably slathered on their own tonics in private. Hypocrisy, it seems, transcends centuries. Your sandals scuff the cobblestones as you think about how far people will go for beauty. For Romans, whitening the skin meant belonging to the elite world of marble halls and shaded porticos. And the slow poison of lead was invisible enough to ignore. Historians debate whether the long decline in Roman birth rates had anything to do with heavy metal poisoning from these cosmetics. It's speculation, but the image of an empire painting itself into fragility is chilling. A cool breeze carries the scent of olive oil, Romans' favorite moisturizer. At least that one seems safe enough, used to smooth hair, shine skin, and even fuel lamps. You imagine the relief of massaging oil into skin after scrubbing away layers of lead paste. But then again, maybe the oil just trapped the toxins closer to the body. You grimace at the thought. Nearby, a young slave is grinding minerals on a flat stone, carefully mixing pigments into small wooden boxes. His master shouts that the lady of the house needs more powder by dawn. The boy nods and keeps working, his hands stained white and red. You wonder if he ever thinks about what he's making, or if he simply accepts that beauty, like everything else in Rome, comes with a price. You glance upward at the stars peeking through the haze of torch smoke. Somewhere in your world, people line up for expensive creams, chasing youth in jars. The ingredients have changed, but the impulse hasn't. Lead or not, crocodile dung or not, humans keep reaching for beauty, even if it stings, even if it scars. Batsigai, noblewoman's litter passes again, her pale face glowing against the night. She smiles faintly, perhaps believing she looks immortal, like a statue come to life. You, however, know the truth, that beneath the shimmer lies a slow undoing, and in the quiet of your own thoughts you wonder which is stranger, the poisons we ignore or the poisons we embrace willingly. The pale shimmer of lead-painted faces fades into memory as you weave deeper into Rome's bustling streets. Lanterns swing from doorways, shadows bend across walls, and somewhere in the throng a merchant calls your name, or at least it sounds like he does. You turn, and there he is, a wiry man standing behind a stall piled high with jars, each one carefully sealed with wax. His banner boasts exotic treasures from Egypt, the land of pharaohs and pyramids. You expect incense, papyrus, maybe spices. Instead, you catch a whiff of something far less glamorous. The merchant grins, holding up a clay pot. He boasts that inside is the finest face cream money can buy, guaranteed to banish wrinkles and restore youthful glow. You lean in cautiously. The aroma is sharp, earthy, and not unlike a stable. He beams proudly. Crocodile dung mixed with fresh mud from the Nile. You blink, waiting for the punchline, but none comes. This is no joke. It's Roman luxury. Roman women, and men too, were fascinated by Egyptian remedies. To them, the Nile carried a kind of mystical prestige. If crocodiles thrived for centuries in its waters, surely their byproducts carried vitality. The cream, smeared across cheeks and forehead, promised to tighten skin and ward off age. Historians still argue whether these dung-based cosmetics were genuinely popular or more of an eccentric fad among the wealthy. Either way, jars of the stuff have been unearthed, proof that at least someone believed in its power. You watch as a matron tests a dab, rubbing it delicately onto her face with a sigh of satisfaction. She swears by it, claims it soothes her skin, better than olive oil ever could. You can't help but marvel at her calm confidence, while trying not to imagine how it smells when the summer sun heats it. The merchant insists there are variations. Some creams blend dung with honey, making it stickier but easier to spread. Others mix it with milk for extra smoothness. A fringe recipe he mutters about, perhaps to impress you, adds crushed pearls, as if diamonds in the rough can distract from the, well, roughness of crocodile contributions. And here's the thing. Romans weren't squeamish about animal byproducts. They used snail slime for sore throats, goat dung in certain poultices, even pig manure as a treatment for acne. Crocodile dung just took the crown for exotic flair. In a way, it's not so different from modern beauty fads that swear by bee, venom, or snail serums. You smirk. Different centuries, same willingness to smear oddities on the skin. You step closer to another stall where jars of unguents glisten under lamplight. A young Roman woman dabs a cream under her eyes, whispering that it's the only thing that keeps her skin soft after days in the sun. You wonder if the placebo effect alone makes it work, and maybe that's enough, belief itself smoothing wrinkles as surely as any ingredient. Still, not everyone was convinced. Satirical poets poked fun at these outlandish creams, painting vivid pictures of noblewomen who smelled more like barnyards than boudoirs. Imagine a senator at dinner leaning in to whisper sweet nothings, only to recoil at the pungent aura of Nile mud. You chuckle at the image, even as your stomach tightens at the thought of sitting too close at a banquet. The crowd around the stall thins, and the merchant turns to you with a sly smile. He insists you try it. He lifts the lid, wafts the scent toward your nose, and waits expectantly. You mumble an excuse, stepping back, but he winks knowingly, as though he's seen the same hesitation in countless other visitors. Perhaps that's part of the allure, to endure a little disgust in the name of glamour. As you drift away, the jars glimmer faintly in the torchlight, rows upon rows of promises sealed in clay. You imagine ships hauling these pots across the Mediterranean, merchants unloading them in Ostia, and fashionable Romans queuing eagerly to buy what you can barely stomach. Luxury, it seems, has always had an element of absurdity. A breeze carries fresher scents, figs roasting on skewers, a hint of cinnamon, but the memory of crocodile cream lingers stubbornly in your mind. You shake your head, laughing softly. One day, people will look back at your world's beauty fads and wrinkle their noses too. Whether it's leeches, lasers, or liquid serums from obscure plants, every era has its version of what were they thinking? You've barely walked a few steps from the Egyptian merchant's stall when the air shifts, sweet oil, resin, and the faint sharpness of something burning. At first, you think another cook shop is roasting goat offal, but then you spot a barber's shop tucked into a corner alcove. Lamps flicker inside, illuminating men sprawled on stools while attendants buzz around them with jars, bowls, and strips of cloth. You step closer and realize this isn't just haircuts, it's hair removal, Roman style. Inside, a young man grimaces, while a barber spreads a thick black paste across his forearm. The mixture is sticky, tar-like, made of pitch, resin, and who knows what else. When the barber presses a strip of rough cloth onto it and gives a quick yank, the man yelps so loudly the whole shop bursts into laughter. You flinch instinctively, your own skin prickling at the thought. Romans took grooming seriously, and smooth, hairless bodies were prized as signs of youth, cleanliness, and even social refinement. Olive oil gleams on the shelves, used to soothe skin afterward. But the removal itself? Brutal. This wasn't the spa wax, you know. This was closer to molten glue, yanked straight off bare flesh. Historians still argue whether women endured it more often than men, or whether gladiators and athletes bore the brunt of it to highlight their muscles. Either way, the screams echo equally, bouncing off the plaster walls. In another corner, a matron reclines with her arms raised as a slave carefully plucks each hair from her armpits with metal tweezers. The process is slow, excruciating, and oddly intimate. A friend sits beside her, gossiping casually, as though this were the most ordinary thing in the world. You imagine a modern salon conversation, but with slightly more shrieking. Fringe remedies line the shelves, ointments of arsenic paste, pumice stone scrubs, and even mixtures said to dissolve hair altogether. Some contained quicklime, which burned the skin almost as much as the hair. You can see why plucking suddenly looks appealing. And yet, Romans embraced these extremes for the sake of fashion. To leave body hair unchecked was to risk being marked as barbaric, unrefined, or worse, lazy. You shift uneasily, remembering satirist Juvenal's barbs aimed at men who waxed too much, calling them effeminate. At the same time, Martial sneered at women who failed to pluck. It was a delicate balance, a moving target of beauty expectations. One moment, you're mocked for not removing enough. The next, for removing too much. You sigh. It seems impossible. To win, no matter the century. The barber waves you closer, holding up a jar of pitch. He grins mischievously, offering to demonstrate. You shake your head quickly, stepping back, and the shop erupts with laughter. Someone mutters that outsiders never understand Roman grooming habits. You smile nervously, but secretly you're relieved you escaped without a strip glued to your arm. Outside again, the night air feels mercifully cool on your skin. The smell of pine resin clings faintly to your nose, as though the whole shop followed. You out. You notice men strolling past with arms gleaming from fresh oil, torsos smooth and shiny under their tunics. The city itself seems polished, sculpted like the marble statues decorating its forums. And just as statues show no body hair, so too did Romans strive to imitate their gods in smoothness. Yet beneath the gleam lurks an irony. By stripping away nature, Romans embraced pain as part of daily life. Beauty was not effortless. It was earned through yanks, burns, and endless plucking. You chuckle softly, realizing how similar it sounds to modern spas, where people willingly sign up for procedures that make them cry, all in the name of looking better. 2,000 years later, the sound of waxing screams hasn't changed much. You glance back one last time at the barber's alcove. Another shout of pain pierces the night, followed by laughter and applause. It's almost festive, like grooming as performance. Perhaps that's what held it all together. The idea that suffering wasn't shameful, but communal. You weren't just enduring alone. You were part of a shared ritual of beauty and discomfort. As you continue down the street, torchlight flickers across your path, casting shadows of statues in niches. Their marble faces gaze down serenely, flawless, hairless, immortal. You can't help but smirk. Those statues didn't have to endure pitch, tweezers, or lime paste. But for Romans chasing their ideal, pain was part of the polish. You walk farther down the narrow street until a new sound mingles with the distant cries of the wax shop. Laughter, splashing water, the murmur of dozens of voices blending together in a warm hum. The noise draws you toward a massive structure, steam rising faintly into the night sky. The door stands open, torches flanking the entrance, and as you step through, you realize you've arrived at one of Rome's greatest inventions. The public baths. Inside, the air is thick with heat, scented with olive oil and smoke from the furnaces, roaring deep beneath the floors. The space is cavernous, divided into chambers that glow in the lamplight. Warm pools, cold plunges, hot steam rooms. Marble statues of nymphs and gods stand watch, while the real action unfolds all around them. Dozens of Romans, men and women alike depending on the hour, shed tunics and slide into the water, chatting freely, gossiping, even cutting deals as if this were an extension of the forum. You hover awkwardly at the edge of a tepid pool. At first glance, it looks inviting, the smooth marble steps glistening, the surface rippling gently. But then you notice the murkiness, the faint film floating where oils have risen to the top. Each bather slathers themselves with olive oil before scraping it off with a curved tool called a strigil. In theory, this removes sweat and dirt. In practice, it all collects in the water. You watch a slave carefully scrape his master's back, the mixture of oil, dust, and skin flakes dripping directly into the pool. You swallow hard. Still, to Romans, this was hygiene. A daily bath wasn't just about cleanliness, it was a social obligation, a chance to show your face, trade rumors, and be seen as respectable. Historians still argue how sanitary the baths truly were, but no one doubts their popularity. Some citizens even bathed multiple times a day, convinced it kept them healthy and fashionable. You settle into a bench by the wall, taking in the scene. A group of senators lean shoulder to shoulder, whispering about a new tax. A merchant floats nearby, boasting about his imported garum shipments. Two young men splash each other until a stern elder scolds them. It's less a spa and more a living stage, where politics, business, and play unfold side by side. In the next chamber, the caldarium, steam curls from hot water while men recline on stone benches. Their skin glows red, their voices echoing in the thick mist. Some argue loudly about chariot races, others debate philosophy, sweat dripping down their brows. You step inside for a moment and immediately feel your lungs tighten. The air is almost too heavy to breathe. You imagine the germs swirling invisibly, trapped in this humid cloud, and wonder how many colds were shared over casual conversations about Cicero. Yet the baths weren't all grime and risk. They offered massages, scented oils, even small libraries attached to larger complexes. Children splashed in shallow pools while their parents traded gossip. Vendors roamed with trays of figs, nuts, and honey cakes. It was equal parts wellness, marketplace, and social media feed, all under one roof. Fringe beliefs attached to the baths, too. Some Romans swore that sitting in the cold plunge after the hot steam could ward off disease. Others claimed the gods themselves favored those who maintained daily bathing rituals. A few even whispered that certain mineral waters carried mystical powers, healing everything from joint pain to infertility. Whether placebo or genuine, the faith in water ran deep. You watch as an attendant empties a bucket into a drain, its contents a cloudy soup of oil and dirt. The drain trickles away toward the city sewers, carrying with it the traces of every body in the room. It's a humbling thought that Rome's sewers hold not just waste, but the collective residue of its daily beauty routines. A sudden laugh catches your attention. Near the far wall, a small group of poets are trading barbed verses, poking fun at a rival's belly or another's receding hairline. The room roars with amusement, the victim pretending to laugh along. You smile. It's oddly comforting to see that locker room banter existed even 2,000 years ago, though delivered in carefully measured hexameters. As you finally step back into the cooler night air, the city smells almost fresh by comparison. A faint breeze stirs the torch smoke, and the stars twinkle faintly above the rooftops. You realize the baths, for all their murk and mingled oils, held a kind of magic. They were the heartbeat of Roman daily life, a place where dirt and dignity swirled together without contradiction. And as you walk away, still feeling the ghost of steam on your skin, you can't help but chuckle. The next time someone calls, their spa day luxurious, you'll picture this: communal tubs, oily scrapes, and the chorus of gossip echoing off marble walls. And as you walk away, still feeling the ghost of steam on your skin, you can't help but chuckle. The next time someone calls their spa day luxurious, you'll picture this: communal tubs, oily scrapes, and the chorus of gossip echoing off marble walls. The streets cool as you wander away from the steamy air of the baths, but your stomach twists with a new curiosity. Rome is always eating, always drinking, always inventing ways to push appetite to its limits. And nowhere does that excess reveal itself more than at the grand banquets of the wealthy. Tonight, you're swept along with a group of finely dressed guests toward a sprawling villa glowing with lamplight. The doorman waves you inside, and suddenly you're standing in the atrium, staring at couches arranged around a massive table laden with food. The first thing you notice is the smell. Roasted meats, boar, peacock, even dormice seasoned with honey and poppy seeds mix with the tang of fermented fish sauce. The aroma is mouth-watering one moment, overwhelming the next. Slaves glide between couches carrying trays of delicacies: oysters glistening in vinegar, eggs stuffed with pine nuts, platters of figs soaked in wine. A musician strums softly in the corner, though his tune is nearly drowned out by the roar of laughter and clinking cups. Your host, a senator with rings stacked on every finger, greets each guest with exaggerated cheer. He reclines on his couch and gestures for wine to be poured, strong, red, and spiced with herbs. You sip cautiously, reminded that Roman wine is often diluted with water, though this batch seems potent enough to make the floor tilt. And just when you think the feast is indulgent, but still within reason, you catch sight of a curious corner setup: a screen, a row of attendants, and a stack of feather fans. It doesn't take long to realize what's happening. Guests, after gorging on delicacies, slip discreetly behind the screen. You hear muffled retching, then see them return moments later, ready for the next course. This is the infamous vomitorium myth, except here it isn't an architectural hall for crowds, as later writers misunderstood. It's a literal practice: induced vomiting, a way to make room for more food and prolong the pleasures of the table. The senator laughs heartily when a plump merchant re-emerges, wiping his mouth, and immediately reaches for a fresh platter of eel pie. To them, This isn't grotesque, it's refinement, a symbol that they're wealthy enough to waste. Historians still argue whether the practice was as common as later tales suggest, or if only the most decadent households indulged. But in this villa, the evidence is right in front of you, feather fans fluttering as attendants prepare the next guest. On the table, a new dish arrives, sausages made from exotic meats, dripping with honey glaze. You hesitate, the image of the room behind the screen still fresh in your mind, but your host waves enthusiastically, insisting you try. You nibble politely, the sweetness masking something faintly gamey. Around you, laughter rises as another guest boasts of once eating flamingo tongue, a delicacy so rare poets wrote about it in tones of awe and disgust at the same time. You overhear another whisper. Some hosts even mixed aphrodisiacs into certain dishes, hoping to spark energy for post-dinner diversions. The idea lingers uneasily as you watch cups refilled again and again, the line behind the screen never quite empty. One young man leans close, confessing with a grin that he once vomited 3 times in one evening just to keep eating spiced dormice. You force a chuckle, realizing that in this world, bragging about stomach endurance counts as high social currency. It's as if the banquet is not just about taste, but stamina, a competition in excess. As the evening stretches on, a slave enters, with a silver tray bearing small perfumed cloths. Guests dab their mouths, disguising any lingering traces of their intermission. The music grows louder, the jokes bawdier, and the feast shows no sign of ending. You lean back, queasy but fascinated, thinking of your own world's food, challenges and buffet binges. 2,000 years pass, yet humans still dare each other to overeat. Eventually, you slip away from the villa, grateful for the cool night air. Behind you, the laughter and clinking cups echo faintly, mingling with the distant sounds of Rome settling into darkness. You shake your head, still picturing the feather fans and the unapologetic return to the banquet couch. In this city, indulgence wasn't a guilty pleasure, it was a badge of honor. And as you walk on, you wonder whether the statues in the Forum ever rolled their marble eyes at nights like these. You drift away from the villa's noise, but Rome has a way of pulling you, straight into its next scene of excess. The streets wind toward the Subura, a district both bustling and infamous, where taverns, brothels, and boarding houses crowd together. Here the smells change, less roasted boar, more sour wine and damp stone. Lamps flicker above doorways painted, with suggestive murals guiding patrons toward pleasures that polite senators would never admit to frequenting. You pause at one such entrance, where a carving of Venus points coyly toward a narrow stairwell. A woman leans in the doorway, her coal-lined eyes flashing as she beckons men inside. You hesitate only a second before curiosity drags you across the threshold. The air within is heavy with incense, covering a musk that makes your nose wrinkle. The brothel is surprisingly organized. Each room bears a fresco, little pictures advertising what services await. Some show couples reclining, others far more acrobatic scenes. The effect is almost like a menu, though one painted 2,000 years. Ego on cracked plaster. You wander past open doorways, catching glimpses of small beds, thin sheets, and bowls of cheap perfume placed strategically to soften the atmosphere. A patron stumbles by you, adjusting his tunic and belching loudly. He tosses a coin to a slave, stationed at the doorway, who tallies it in a wax tablet with mechanical indifference. Prices, you quickly gather, are modest, cheaper than a dinner in a mid-tier tavern. For some Romans, this was less luxury and more routine errand, like stopping at the bakery. Yet for all its normalization, whispers circulate. Historians still argue how socially acceptable brothel visits were for respectable men, and whether wives tolerated them as ordinary male behavior or quietly seethed. Satirists mocked politicians who spent more time in such establishments than in the Senate, suggesting that everyone knew and judged, at least a little. Fringe customs add to the strangeness. Some Romans swore by amulets or charms meant to heighten pleasure or ward off disease. You overhear a woman offering a patron a small bronze phallus on a chain, assuring him it guarantees virility. He laughs, but buys it anyway, slipping it into his purse before disappearing into a side room. One brothel keeper, proudly points to her frescoes, explaining that they also help illiterate clients choose quickly. You nod politely, realizing these painted walls double as both advertisement and decoration, ensuring that even in dim candlelight, no one could misunderstand what was on offer. And then comes the discomforting detail: a corner filled with slaves, some barely older than teenagers, waiting their turn to be summoned. The brothel doesn't discriminate by gender or age, so long as a coin is paid. You shift uneasily. The lively laughter around you suddenly soured. It's a stark reminder that behind the glossy murals and witty frescoes, much of this economy runs on coercion. As you step back into the street, the night air feels like a relief, even with its smoke and sewer tang. You glance up at the stars, barely visible above the crowded rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, noble households dine and debate poetry. Here in the Subura, bodies are traded with the same efficiency as grain or oil. A stray thought tickles your mind. Modern cities have red light districts too, neon signs instead of frescoes, perfume sprays instead of bowls of myrrh. The similarities are uncomfortably close, proof that some human appetites never really change. You smirk at the irony. Rome boasted aqueducts, amphitheatres, and roads stretching across continents, yet at night its citizens still crowded into dingy rooms painted with crude cartoons. Walking on, you can still hear the laughter spilling from the doorways behind you, mingled with the clink of coins and the shuffle of sandals. The city hums with desire, commerce, and secrets, all carried along the narrow streets like smoke you can't quite escape. Your feet carry you away from the Subura's smoky doorways, yet the echoes of laughter and clinking coins fade only, slowly. Soon, another kind of nighttime murmur takes its place. Chanting, whispers, and the faint metallic rattle of charms. You've stumbled toward one of Rome's less respectable obsessions: magical rites, love potions, and the darker side of desire. In a cramped courtyard, lit by a single torch, you find a group huddled around a clay cauldron. A woman draped in black stirs something thick and pungent, muttering phrases you can't quite catch. The smell rising from the pot makes your stomach tighten. Sharp herbs, acrid smoke, and, faintly, something animal. She sprinkles what looks suspiciously like powdered bone into the brew, then beckons her nervous client forward. The man clutches a small vial, desperate for a potion that will supposedly make a certain neighbor fall hopelessly in love with him. Love magic in Rome was big business. Amulets shaped like phalluses dangled from doorways to ward off envy and stir passion. Witches, often marginalized women, promised concoctions brewed from exotic ingredients: crocodile dung, owl feathers, menstrual blood. Historians still argue whether these potions were sincerely believed to work, or whether clients simply clung to any shred of hope in their tangled romances. Either way, the rituals thrived in alleyways and secret courtyards. Across the city, you lean closer and catch the woman chanting the name of Venus, mixing it with curses against imagined rivals. Then she tips a drop of blood into the cauldron, her own, pricked quickly with a pin, and the client gasps as though he's already bewitched. It's part theatre, part chemistry, part psychological trick, and all of it runs on desperation. But not every charm was so elaborate. Some were almost comical. One surviving inscription suggests writing a crush's name on a wax tablet, then burying it under their doorstep to make them dream of you. Another fringe practice involves slipping love potion herbs into a target's food, though the result was probably indigestion more than passion. And still, Romans whispered about success stories, spreading the reputation of these spells like wildfire. The darker side appears in curses. Some tablets unearthed near Roman baths and taverns call down divine wrath on rivals, especially romantic ones. You imagine a spurned lover scratching out pleas to the underworld. May Marcus never satisfy another woman until he returns to me. You shiver, half at the spite, half at the idea that such curses were tucked under floorboards where bathers once soaked their skin. And then there's the bizarre belief in magical sweat. Certain magicians claimed that scraping sweat, or hair from a beloved's clothing, gave them irresistible control. You picture someone sneaking a tunic from the laundry, tucking it away for an evening of incantations. It's ridiculous, yes, but also strangely familiar. Like those modern stories of people keeping an ex's hoodie just to feel closer. Humans, it seems, haven't lost their talent for attaching power to fabric. A sudden cackle snaps you back. The witch has finished bottling her brew, corking it tightly before pressing it into her client's trembling hands. He pays in coins. The clink loudly in the silence, then rushes off into the night as though his future happiness depends entirely on that muddy potion. The witch smirks, tucks the money into her sash, and begins preparing the next spell. As you slip away from the courtyard, you can't help but marvel at Rome's contradictions. Here was a city with aqueducts so advanced they still inspire engineers, and yet its people whispered about owl feathers granting eternal love. Here were senators quoting Stoic philosophy by day, then sneaking out to pay witches by night. The rational and the irrational walked side by side, never quite cancelling each other out. The night feels thicker now, the alleys more shadowed. You glance at every torch, wondering if behind it someone is burying a tablet, whispering a curse, or brewing a potion that smells of equal parts garlic and desperation. You chuckle quietly. Next time someone offers you a mysterious drink, you'll think twice, especially if it's got the consistency of swamp water. You wander from the smoky courtyard of whispered curses, but Rome won't let you forget its obsession with the body, not just in love or lust, but in beauty itself. The streets glow faintly with oil lamps as you follow a group of young women carrying baskets. They chatter about powders, creams, and dyes, and you trail them toward a Io domus where mirrors glint in every corner. Tonight, you find yourself at the dressing table of Roman cosmetics, a theater of transformation, and, frankly, some of the most bizarre beauty practices you've ever seen. The first thing you notice is the little jars. Rows of them, each labeled in faded ink. One holds powdered lead, bright and chalky, used to whiten the skin. A lady dips her fingers into it and pats her cheeks until her face gleams ghostly pale. You wince, knowing what she doesn't. Lead isn't just makeup, it's poison. Historians still argue whether women realized the danger or ignored it for fashion's sake, but either way, this pursuit of beauty often came at a very real cost. Beside her, another woman leans over a bronze mirror, darkening her eyelashes with soot mixed in animal fat. She blinks carefully, then sneezes, leaving a streak across her nose. Laughter bubbles around the room, though she quickly dabs it clean and resumes, determined to perfect the look. Roman poets once mocked women for spending hours on these rituals, but you can't deny the artistry, however smelly the ingredients. 1. Jar makes you pause. Its contents are greenish-brown, with an odor both earthy and unsettling. A slave explains it's crocodile dung, imported from Egypt, prized for its supposed sun-blocking properties. You remember the baths, the perfumes, the constant exposure to the Mediterranean sun. Romans would smear this across their skin as a kind of ancient sunscreen. You stifle a laugh, picturing a fashionable matron strutting proudly down the forum, while reeking faintly of swamp. Hair dye adds another layer of strangeness. Recipes call for mixtures of leeks, ashes, even pigeon droppings to create fashionable shades. Some women bleach their hair with soap made from goat fat and beechwood ashes, leaving it a brittle straw yellow. Wigs are popular too, often made from the hair of captured Germanic women, an unsettling reminder that conquest even extended to hairstyles. You wonder whether those pale braids, once belonging to someone across the Rhine, made Roman heads feel more exotic or simply more superior. 1. Young man, clearly not shy, powders his face with equal care, then smooths a solve made of ground pearls and honey across his cheeks. The effect is luminous, though the cost must be staggering. He turns to you with a wink as if to say, yes, even emperors wore rouge. You can't help but grin back, thinking of how little has changed in the world of skincare marketing. Fringe tidbit emerges when another guest unveils her secret weapon. Mouse fat mixed with frankincense, dabbed on her forehead to prevent wrinkles. The group nods solemnly as though this is tried and true science. You shake your head, resisting the urge to make a modern joke about the booming anti-aging industry. Maybe humanity's real tradition isn't any particular recipe, it's the eternal fear of looking old. As the evening continues, you watch powders puff into the air, perfumes sprayed liberally, cheeks rouged until they glow. The room becomes a haze of scents: roses, myrrh, vinegar, smoke. It's intoxicating and overwhelming all at once. Someone jokes that even the statues of the gods would cough in here, and everyone bursts into laughter. You cover your own mouth, realizing you might actually be sneezing from the cloud of lead dust floating about. Historians still argue whether Roman men truly admired these painted faces or secretly preferred a more natural look. Some surviving love poetry mocks women for their heavy cosmetics, while other verses celebrate the artifice as alluring. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. People love to criticize what they also couldn't stop desiring. Finally, the jars are closed, the mirrors polished, and the group prepares to step out into the Roman night. Faces shining, eyes rimmed, hair perfumed. They look transformed, almost like marble statues brought to life. Yet you can't shake the uneasy thought that behind the glamour, every breath of lead dust or smear of crocodile dung carried hidden dangers. As you follow them back into the street, the air feels fresher, cooler, mercifully free of powders. You chuckle quietly. If you survive this tour of Rome's beauty secrets, you'll never complain about the smell of your own shampoo again. The streets grow quieter now, though your senses are anything but calm. After so much powder, perfume, and whispered magic, you can't help noticing another element that drifts everywhere in Rome: the endless games of gossip. You slip into a tavern near the Forum, the kind where benches creak, lamps flicker, and every cup of wine is paired with someone's secret. Romans thrived on rumor, and what you overhear tonight makes the chatter of any modern office look like polite small talk. A merchant at the nearest table waves his hands dramatically, telling his companions about a senator's mistress caught sneaking out the back of a bathhouse. The men roar with laughter, slapping the table so hard the cups rattle. You sip from your own mug, realizing this isn't idle amusement, it's a public sport. Reputations in Rome rose and fell, not only in courts or on battlefields, but in the smoky corners of places exactly like this. The chatter expands. One woman leans in to describe how her neighbor uses donkey's milk not just for bathing, but supposedly for cooking porridge. A man across the room swears he heard of a general who smeared goose fat on his legs before running in military drills, claiming it improved his stamina. You raise your eyebrows. Maybe that was less strategy and more slapstick. Historians still argue whether these tales preserve truth or are just ancient urban legends, but the fact that they spread so eagerly tells you plenty about Roman humor. Quirky tidbits abound. Someone swears by the story of Emperor Nero composing entire operas while reclining on a waterbed filled with rose petals, his lovers fanning him with ostrich plumes. Another insists Caligula once held dinner parties for his horse. You try not to laugh too loudly, but the thought of a horse politely sipping wine from a goblet nearly makes you choke. These anecdotes float between fact and satire, yet Romans never seemed to care where truth ended and exaggeration began. The tavern's host bustles by, filling mugs with sour wine. He pauses to share his own nugget. Apparently, a wealthy matron was fined for letting her pet monkey attend the baths, where it promptly snatched hairpins and refused to return them. The entire room erupts in laughter again, and you join in, partly at the absurdity, partly because the image is so vivid you can almost see it. But gossip wasn't all harmless comedy. Sharp words carried political weight. Satirists like Juvenal and Martial wrote verses dripping with insults, exaggerating rivals' bodily habits or mocking their supposed bedroom failings. The Romans relished these barbs, passing poems from hand to hand the way you might scroll memes today. Lives could be ruined by a particularly biting couplet, and yet the appetite for it never waned. One scholar once suggested gossip acted as a kind of social glue, binding citizens together through shared stories, however cruel. Listening tonight, you see it. Strangers nodding at each other, laughing in sync, whispering details to make themselves feel in the know. It's community through mockery, and it's intoxicating. You lean back, watching the oil lamp sway, and realize even emperors weren't safe. Augustus was whispered about for his fondness for neat clothing, mocked as too fussy. Tiberius was said to retreat to Capri with swimming companions of questionable age. Whether true or not, these rumors shaped their legacies just as much as wars or decrees. Someone nearby raises a toast to secrets, and the whole tavern echoes it with a clatter of mugs. The sound rings in your ears as you slip back into the street. The air outside feels cooler, but your head buzzes, with all the half-true, half-false tales you've just absorbed. You shake your head, chuckling softly. Even in an empire of aqueducts and marble temples, what really thrilled people was whether their neighbor's cousin was sneaking donkey milk into her breakfast. Perhaps the real backbone of Rome wasn't its legions or senators. It was gossip, whispered over wine until it became history. You drift away from the laughter of the tavern, only to catch a new scent wafting down the alley, smoke mingled with resin and something musky. Following your nose, you arrive at a bustling stall, stacked high with amphorae and tiny clay jars. Perfume, incense, oils. Rome's obsession with masking and manipulating smells spills out here, filling the night with a haze of fragrance strong enough to make your head spin. A young vendor proudly offers you a sample dabbed onto your wrist. The oil feels sticky, warm from the lamp flames, and the aroma hits you instantly. Sweet myrrh blended with something sour. You nod politely, though inside you're wincing. Romans adored heavy layered perfumes, but to modern noses, many of them would register as a collision between incense burner and barnyard. Historians still argue whether people wore them purely for pleasure or simply to disguise the less pleasant. Background odors of Rome itself. Perfumes here weren't just cosmetic. They carried social meaning. A senator entering the Senate chamber smelling of cinnamon oil announced his wealth as loudly as his toga. Courtesans dabbed exotic mixtures behind their ears, sometimes blending in musk from animals like civets to create what they believed was irresistible allure. You picture a crowded banquet where every guest reeks of competing aromas until the air itself feels drunk. Quirky tidbits crop up as you browse. One recipe calls for crushed rose petals mixed with vinegar and, oddly enough, ground snail shells. Another boasts of saffron as a base, which Romans loved to sprinkle not just in food, but in perfumes, and even on theatre floors, so audiences inhaled it as they cheered. And then there's the strangest ingredient of all. Sweat. Some formulas, mixed in the perspiration of athletes or gladiators, thought to transmit virility. You chuckle, imagining a Roman equivalent of modern cologne ads. Now with real gladiator essence. Incense played its part, too. In temples, coils of frankincense smoke curled toward marble ceilings, carrying prayers with them. At home, people burned resins to cover the smell of cooking, or, less glamorously, to fend off the odors drifting up from shared latrines. One scholar once joked that Roman incense wasn't just spiritual, it was survival. You nod in agreement, thinking of the alley stench you've been dodging all evening. You notice a young woman filling a vial with perfume and tucking it into her sash. She smiles, confessing she'll sprinkle it on her lover's cloak later so he'll smell her even when she isn't there. The gesture is tender, if a little pungent. Across the stall, an older man boasts about buying a blend used by Cleopatra herself, though you suspect he's fallen for clever marketing. Some things never change, yet perfumes weren't universally adored. Satirists mocked men who doused, themselves so heavily they left oily stains on seats. Martial once quipped that some people's scents lingered in the air long after they'd gone, like ghosts haunting the street. Romans joked that a strong whiff of perfume meant the person was hiding an even stronger whiff of sweat. You smirk, recognizing the eternal rule. Wear just enough, never too much. As you step back into the night, the mingled smells cling to your tunic. Every movement releases another puff of sweetness, spice, and faint musk. You realize you've become a walking amphora yourself, trailing invisible clouds that any passing dog would probably find irresistible. The thought makes you laugh under your breath. Rome may have conquered nations, but here in its alleys and markets, it conquered the human nose first, sometimes delighting it, sometimes overwhelming it, always reminding you that smell was part of power, seduction, and survival. You leave, behind the perfume haze, shaking your head to clear the sweetness, and drift toward the edge of the city where things quiet down. The moonlight spills over worn paving stones, and you suddenly realize what's missing: privacy. Rome, for all its marble grandeur, offered very little solitude. Tonight, you step into one of the most peculiar features of Roman life: the public. Latrines. At first glance, the stone benches look almost elegant, curved in neat rows with evenly spaced openings. But then you notice the lack of walls, the total absence of partitions. People simply sat side by side, doing their business as casually as chatting in a cafe. You hesitate, trying not to picture the awkward eye contact. Some scholars still argue whether Romans found this normal or whether even they privately cringed, but either way, the arrangement reminds you just how different their ideas of personal space were. A man waves you over, cheerfully making room as though inviting you to join in. You politely decline, edging closer only to study the setup. Below the seats, water trickles in a shallow channel, carrying waste away. Ingenious, yes, but hardly odorless. The air here is heavy, earthy, and despite the trickling stream, you swear it clings to your sandals. Nearby, a boy demonstrates the communal sponge on a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar water, shared by everyone. He rinses it casually, then replaces it for the next person. You fight the urge to shudder. Modern germs dance in your imagination, though Romans swore vinegar was a solid disinfectant. A quirky tidbit here: some jokes suggest pranksters would swap out the sponge for a thorny sea urchin, a gag both cruel and unforgettable. You can't help but laugh nervously, hoping that was more satire than history. Latrines weren't just about hygiene, they were social hubs. Men conducted business deals while seated, gossip flowed faster than the drainage water, and friendships cemented through side-by-side conversations. One poet even complained that he couldn't escape creditors pestering him in the bathroom. You chuckle, thinking of how intrusive a phone call feels today. Imagine having to negotiate a loan while holding a sponge stick. Of course, the danger wasn't only to dignity. Ancient writers mention foul gases building up underground, sometimes igniting unexpectedly. You glance around, half expecting a fiery belch from the channel below, though tonight the only hazard seems to be the smell. Historians still argue whether these explosions were frequent reality or exaggerated warnings, but either way, you take a step back from the bench just in case. Stepping outside again, the fresh air feels heavenly. The stars gleam above, and you inhale deeply, grateful for the breeze off the Tiber. Behind you, the chatter continues, the latrine serving as both necessity and clubhouse. Romans had few illusions about bodily functions. To them, this was as ordinary as shopping for bread. You walk on, smiling faintly. Maybe the most striking lesson isn't the sponge or the lack of privacy. It's how thoroughly the Romans wove even their most personal routines into the fabric of public life. In Rome, you weren't just part of a city, you were part of a constant, noisy, and very communal experiment in being human together. You wander farther from the latrines, grateful for the cool night breeze washing away vinegar memories, only to stumble upon another curiosity of Roman life: their love of pets, and not the cozy kind you might expect. A narrow alley opens into a courtyard where cages rattle and chains clink, and you suddenly realize that Romans didn't stop at dogs or cats. Tonight, you're surrounded by creatures from all corners of the empire. A boy parades a pet monkey on a leash, the little creature tugging and screeching while spectators laugh. Its owner proudly explains that monkeys are trained to fetch dropped coins or pickpocket guests at banquets, a party trick equal parts clever and chaotic. You raise an eyebrow, imagining your modern friends inviting you over while their pet attempts to steal your wallet. Historians still argue whether such tales were exaggerated satire or genuine custom, but the popularity of monkeys in mosaics and poetry suggests truth in the madness. Next comes a man showing off his collection of exotic birds. Parrots squawk, in Greek, taught to mimic phrases, while a raven croaks what sounds suspiciously like a dirty joke. The crowd roars with laughter. Romans adored birds that could speak, often displaying them like living jewelry at feasts. A quirky tidbit, Pliny the Elder records a raven trained to greet Emperor Tiberius by name. Becoming so famous, it drew jealous rivals who, tragically, killed it. You sigh, realizing celebrity culture isn't new at all, but the most astonishing sight is a leopard tethered by a heavy chain, its golden coat gleaming under torchlight. The owner brags it once appeared in an arena but was spared afterward as a luxury pet. The animal snarls softly, and you instinctively step back. Owning a predator seems more like madness than status, but in Rome, danger and display often went hand in hand. Of course, not every Roman household indulged in the exotic. Wealthy matrons kept lapdogs, soldiers adopted stray cats, and children played with mice or beetles tied to threads. One writer even mentions a young girl so devoted to her pet goose that it followed her to market daily, honking at anyone who came too close. You grin at the image, a feathered bodyguard waddling faithfully behind its charge. Still, hygiene was a forgotten concern. Exotic animals meant exotic parasites, and cages rarely received thorough cleaning. Fleas, mites, and less mentionable companions thrived in households that prized novelty over sanitation. You can almost feel phantom itches on your arms just from watching the monkey groom itself. Yet Romans barely blinked, more concerned with showing off their curiosities than scrubbing away the filth they carried. As the night deepens, you notice one family releasing a cage of dormice, the same delicacy you sampled earlier, except here they're cherished as pets. The children giggle, letting the plump rodents crawl across their shoulders. You shake your head at the contradiction. A creature one person stuffs with nuts for dinner, another cuddles like a treasure. Rome, in all its contradictions, makes sense only when you accept that normal is relative. Stepping back into the street, you glance over your shoulder at the torchlit menagerie. The monkey's shriek mingles with the parrot's chatter, the leopard's growl rumbles low, and the goose honks proudly from somewhere in the crowd. It's a discordant orchestra, a living reminder that Rome was not just empire and marble, but chaos and curiosity embodied in feathers, fur, and scales. The laughter and chatter of animal keepers fade as you follow a quieter path leading out of the city. The bustle softens into hushed voices, and soon you find yourself near the shadow of roadside tombs. Romans rarely buried their dead inside the city walls. Law and superstition kept the living and the departed apart, so necropolies lined the roads just beyond the gates. Under torchlight, the stone monuments loom tall, carved with names, epitaphs, and reliefs of the departed smiling stiffly, as though still demanding recognition from every passerby. At first glance, the tombs look solemn and orderly. But step closer, and the reality grows less polished. Offerings left by grieving families, baskets of fruit, bits of bread, and jugs of wine, have begun to decay. The smell lingers in the night air, a bittersweet mix of sour grapes, mold, and dust. Rats dart among the offerings, bold enough to squeak at you as though you're intruding on their feast. You wrinkle your nose, realizing how easily ritual could turn into vermin buffet. Romans believed feeding the dead nourished their spirits, keeping them content in the afterlife. Some families even built pipes leading into tombs, pouring wine or honey directly down to reach the remains. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic gesture or sincere attempt at ghostly refreshment. You imagine a skeleton reclining below, waiting for its nightly pour like a patron at a tavern. The image makes you smile, though you shiver too, knowing faith in restless spirits was deeply felt. Quirky practices appear everywhere here. Some tombs hold carved phalluses, symbols not of indecency, but of protection against evil. Others are decorated with tiny dolls or glass trinkets meant to comfort the dead as if they were children. And then there are the curses, lead tablets buried with names scratched into them, appealing to underworld gods to harass enemies. Even in death, Romans found ways to make things personal. The air is heavy with smoke from small lamps flickering. Along the roadside, families often visited at night, sitting to share meals with their ancestors, chatting softly as though the dead were simply distant relatives catching up. The practice feels touching, even charming, until you recall the flies, the spoiled food, the damp earth soaked with offerings. To the Romans, though, closeness with the departed outweighed discomfort. Death in Rome wasn't hidden away as in modern times. It was part of daily scenery. Children passed tombs on their way to school, soldiers marched past cemeteries on the road to campaigns, and merchants hawked wares beside grave markers. Life and death overlapped constantly, the smells of rot and incense mingling with the aroma of bread or garum stew. You linger by one tomb where the inscription reads, "Traveler, stop and greet me." You obey, whispering a hello, and feel a strange calm settle in the air. For all the oddities, the rats, the rancid offerings, the unsettling superstitions, there's a tenderness here too. Romans lived among their dead, unashamed, accepting decay as part of existence. Stepping back toward the city lights, you catch one last whiff of sour wine and smoky oil. It clings faintly, reminding you that even Rome's grandeur rested on foundations of bone, ash, and the everyday smells of mortality. The moon rides higher now, silvering the rooftops of Rome as you return from the necropolis. Your steps slow, because the city itself is beginning to quiet, and so too must the story you've been following. The noises of taverns and markets fade into the background until only the soft shuffling of sandals and the occasional bark of a dog remain. You feel, perhaps for the first time tonight, that you can exhale without something strange or pungent rushing to meet you. You think back over what you've witnessed. Tavern games spiced with too much wine, kitchens where delicacies blurred. The line between gourmet and grotesque, perfumed alleys, sponge sticks, monkeys, and tombs that refused to let the dead rest quietly. Each episode was its own layer of oddity, but together they formed a patchwork city alive with contradictions. Rome seemed endlessly confident in its choices, whether or not they made sense to outsiders. You walked its streets, and, in doing so, you inhaled its courage to embrace life in all its messy, fragrant, communal glory. As the last torches flicker low, your mind grows softer, more reflective. You notice the hum of crickets outside the walls, the distant slosh of the Tiber, and the way the night air cools against your cheeks. The energy of the city no longer presses on you. It recedes like a tide, leaving you gently on the shore of quiet thought. The details that once shocked or amused you now feel rounded, smoothed by distance, becoming stories rather than stings. Your breathing slows. Each inhale carries a little less of the smoke and spice of Rome, and a little more of stillness. Each exhale releases the laughter, the embarrassment, even the faint shivers of unease. You let them drift upward, like incense smoke curling into the dark, dissolving until nothing remains but calm. The city beneath you seems to fall asleep as well. Arches, temples, amphorae, and fountains slipping into shadow, their noise replaced by silence. And in that silence, the strangeness no longer feels heavy. It feels human, just like you. Flawed, creative, curious, forever trying to find warmth, connection, and meaning. So you rest here, at the edge of Rome, where even the most bizarre practices soften into memory, and memory itself becomes a lullaby. Let your eyes close, let your thoughts wander, and let the ancient city settle into the background hum of your dreams.